Okay, welcome to the fifth webinar in ICA's monthly speaker series, Navigating ICBPS Conversations with Experts. Today's webinar will feature Dr. Laura Santurri and Dr. Renee Hetzler presenting Don't Believe Everything You Read, How to Make Informed Decisions About Your Care. We are so excited you are here with us today. Before we start, I have a few housekeeping items. First of all, please note that this session is being recorded. So if you're going to be on camera, please remember that your video is going to be included in the recording as well. And second, we will have a Q&A session following the presentation. To ask a general medical question, which is not personal, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom. You will be asked to unmute yourself. If you aren't speaking, please be sure to stay muted. You can also ask a question using the chat feature. Our presenters will answer as many questions as they can in our hour-long webinar. And finally, please complete the post-webinar survey. A link to the survey will be posted in the chat at the end of the presentation. Okay, it's time to get started. So without further ado, please welcome Doctors Laura Santurri and Renee Hetzler.
Thank you very much, Lee. And welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. I don't know about you all, but I've had one of those days where I've had one meeting after another and I've been running around. So what I would encourage everyone to do right now, if you feel comfortable doing so, is take a moment and let's do a big stretch. I don't know about you, but sometimes I learn from my dogs and I take a moment to just stretch out, remind myself where I am, and if you hear my dogs in the background at any point of this webinar, I will apologize in advance. But thank you all for joining. So we're going to go ahead and get started by introducing ourselves, just so that you have a good understanding of who we are and why we're talking to you today in this virtual space about this particular topic. So I'm going to first let my colleague, Dr. Renee Hetzler, introduce herself.
Thank you, Laura. My name is Renee Hetzler. I am a physical therapist. I spent a few years working in the outpatient realm prior to switching to academia. So currently I teach in the Doctor of Physical Therapy program at Nazareth University, which is in Rochester, New York. And prior to that, I specialized in neurologic physical therapy, but I also saw people with a variety of chronic conditions. So I have a fair amount of experience with helping people navigate some chronic issues. I am currently pursuing my doctorate of health science degree at the University of Indianapolis, which is where I met Laura.
Great, thank you, Renee. So my background is in public health and specifically health education and promotion. And as an academic in health sciences and at the University of Indianapolis, my research agenda has focused very much on the experience of self-managing chronic conditions, and obviously with a very specific focus on conditions like interstitial cystitis and bladder pain syndrome, which you will probably hear me say just as IC for the remainder of the webinar for the sake of brevity. And I care very much about this community. I've been engaged with the ICA in a variety of ways for a couple of decades. Most recently, I just finished up my first year as chair of the board of directors. And importantly, I know what it's like to live with this condition because I've spent over half my life with it. And I think that's really part of the reason why I care so much about this particular topic. My discipline tells me that information is necessary, although not sufficient, to ensure good outcomes when you're living with a chronic condition. What we know matters. As a person living with a condition, I also know that there are times where I feel very overwhelmed by living with it, by the symptoms and the impacts of those symptoms. And when I find myself in those moments where I'm feeling overwhelmed, one of the things that I do is I ask myself, what can I control today? And it turns out I can control a lot more than sometimes I think. But one of the things that I know that I can control is the information that I seek about my condition and about my care, and the decisions that I get to make about that. So that's really why this is so important to me. And you can see here on this slide some of the objectives that we have for your participation in today's webinar. So these are things that we would hope that you would be able to do as a product of spending this hour with us, or at least getting you thinking about how to do these things. And so we're going to start kind of general with, I like to start with the why. So why is this important? And what are we even saying when we're saying informed decision? And then we're going to unpack some things. So you probably hear the term evidence-based pretty regularly. So we're going to unpack what that means and how to find that type of information. We're going to spend some time thinking about how to unpack or evaluate health claims, because we get them all the time. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about the decision-making process as well. And there will be at points throughout the webinar, we're going to ask for your feedback. So please, there will be times where I'll ask you to put something in the chat or even unmute and speak up. And we would definitely want you to feel comfortable doing that. So let's start with the big picture. Okay, why are we even talking about this? And what are we talking about when we say an informed decision? So I'm going to start with a question for you. And this is a place where if you feel comfortable doing so, to put your answer in the chat, or you can certainly unmute and share it with the group. But one of the first things I want to know is, where do you get your information to make decisions about your care related to your IC? So take a moment, think about it to yourself. And if you're comfortable, go ahead and put that in the chat. I'll give you a moment to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I see some folks are starting to add Google. Absolutely. What would we do without Google? Any other places where you get your information? And there's no judgment here at all. Doctors, okay. From the ICA, okay. We're glad to hear that. If you think of others, you're welcome to add them to the chat. That's completely fine. And you may have thought of some just to yourself. And the truth is, there are many, many sources of information out there. And that's really the beauty of it. We, especially this day and age, we have such a diversity of perspectives at our fingertips. I see someone just added a provider in Google. Absolutely. Yeah, so, we've got our healthcare team, and hopefully our healthcare team is interdisciplinary. Speaking of diversity of perspective, that can be very helpful. But certainly the internet, and not just social media and websites. The internet also gives us a way to access the scientific literature or organizations that help interpret the scientific literature for us. And Renee in a little bit is going to talk about some of those resources. And certainly our friends and family too. They're also excellent resources for information for us. So again, that diversity of perspective is a really good thing. But this is precisely why I think it's really important to be talking about this, because not all information, I would say, is equal in its value. Some information is absolutely helpful. Some of it is maybe just not so helpful. And there are also times where information can actually be harmful, okay? And it can be really hard to wade through a lot of information. So there's all this stuff at our fingertips, but it can be challenging to make sense of it. And I know for me at times, it can almost feel a little bit paralyzing because there is so much. And you may not know exactly what to do with the information out there, and especially how to make decisions about it, okay? And I see a couple people have added some additional things. A Facebook group, absolutely. Books, absolutely, yeah. So, when I think about this, when we talk about making an informed decision, especially with all that information that's out there, there's a resource that I really like. And at the end of this presentation, which you will get a copy of, so don't feel like you have to take notes of anything, we have a list of resources. And one of the resources uses an analogy that I really like, and that's the three-legged stool, because it's all about balance. So there is this acknowledgement that there are kind of three categories that need to be in balance or be solid for us in order to make informed decisions. One is making sure that we are taking into account our own needs and our own preferences. And this does include the people around us, our family and friends and people who care about us. Certainly our healthcare team should be a part of this as well, and the best science or data that we have, the findings from the research. And so just like if a stool has 3 legs that are all of equal length and they're all solid, you can put something on top of it like that lovely potted plant in the picture. And in the same way, if you are accounting for each of these 3 areas when you're making decisions, you're more likely to make a fully informed decision that's going to be good for you. And Renee is going to unpack this a little bit more. So I'm going to turn things over to her to talk a little bit about evidence-based information.
Thank you. So yes, evidence-based information, I think, can sound like a loaded term, but we're going to talk about exactly what that means and how to find the information that we want to rely on. As Laura mentioned, the 3-legged stool analogy is pretty prevalent. It's taught in most medical study programs, so PT school, OT school, medical school. And the definition of evidence-based care is just that it is involving making decisions based on the latest evidence through trusted research studies, clinician expertise, and person's preferences. So we're going to talk about each of those as we go here. We're going to start with the research study or the best available clinical evidence. So the best available clinical evidence is tiered. And at the bottom of the tier is kind of expert opinion or background information, studies on animals, things like that. And this is what we rely on if we don't have scientific studies done on whatever our question is. And it doesn't necessarily mean the evidence at the bottom of this pyramid is wrong or bad information. It just means that there's not as much strength of evidence as evidence that comes from studies higher up the pyramid. So the studies that are stronger are studies that have the most control in them. So we're controlling the most variables. So we're isolating the question that we're really interested in, and the studies that have the largest number of subjects. So I'll talk a little bit about the different types of studies, but we're not going to get into too much detail because it is fairly complicated. But right above the expert opinion or background information, we have some observational studies where we're looking at naturally what's happening with individuals or groups of individuals if we try a certain intervention. Once we start to control that, we get to the randomized controlled trial or RCT. And I think a lot of people have heard that term, maybe not everybody, but this is the strongest type of trial where we have 2 groups of people and we are implementing one variable with one group and not implementing it in the other group. And we're being very strategic and trying to measure the outcomes of implementing that variable. Above that, the next 3 levels in the pyramid are all people that are looking at studies that have been done and evaluating how much we can trust them. So did they set the study up appropriately? Did they have enough subjects that we can trust the information? And there's the different levels here are looking at one study versus looking, the top here is a systematic review. What that means is that a group of people has searched for all of the articles available on a specific topic. They have rigorously looked at the individual studies and rated how strong they are. And then they've combined the conclusions from those studies to give a summary for people. So ideally, the strongest evidence we can use is a systematic review. It's also nice because it saves us a lot of time. We as individuals don't want to be reading 20 different studies on a topic. We want somebody to do that for us. So if you see those terms out there, that's where this is coming from. But now we will move on to talking about the next source of information, which is clinician expertise. Clinician expertise varies quite a bit. And I saw someone in the chat say that their doctors were not very helpful when it comes to IC. And I'm guessing that that is a common finding for people. So unfortunately, clinicians we tend to put them on pedestals, but they're really just people and they are trying to do the best they can. And they are good at some things and not good at other things. So it may involve some physician shopping if that's an option. But some factors to consider with clinician expertise. The first factor is specialization versus generalization. So primary care physicians are examples of generalists, meaning they know a decent amount about a lot of different topics and their primary role is to serve as sort of a gatekeeper in the medical field. And they want to get you to a specialist that can help you with a specific problem, if possible. There are some pros and cons to seeing a specialist, and there's pros and cons to seeing a generalist. A specialist might be the most informed on whatever topic you need them to be. However, sometimes they can have a little bit of tunnel vision too. So they tend to fall under that adage that to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So they might recommend the same thing to every patient that walks in the door. So you have to keep that in mind if you're seeing a specialist. A generalist has a broader perspective, which is great, but they might not have enough information to be as helpful to you. Other factors to consider: how long has this person been in practice? So how much have they seen? And how much experience do they have with this specific condition or this specific intervention? Personal experience: if your clinician actually has the condition that you're interested in, great, they can really relate and give you a lot of helpful information. Familiarity with you: this tends to be a benefit for a generalist. So your primary care physician hopefully knows you and that can help with decision making. And lastly is the time they spend keeping up with current evidence. And I don't want to bash any providers, because I am a provider, so I can say it is very challenging to keep up with current evidence. I get bombarded with emails all the time about studies coming out on a variety of topics. And our healthcare system is really not set up to support providers in keeping up with evidence. It's up to them to read articles on their own time or go to conferences. And there's a certain amount that they're required to do for licensing purposes, but it is a challenge. So I would not expect your provider to necessarily know about that study that just came out with whatever X, Y, and Z you heard about. Hopefully they do, but you should try to keep yourself as informed as possible to contribute to the conversation. And the last one, which I don't want to diminish, because I think it tends to get kind of like pushed to the side. Oh yeah, patient preferences. We'll figure that out as we go. But patients are really the experts in themselves. It's very valuable input that they have in the decision-making process. And providers are, like I said, we are taught this, but I think some providers don't necessarily take it to heart. So person-centered or patient-centered healthcare has been much more promoted recently, and it involves prioritizing a person's values and preferences. It tends to end up with a more holistic approach, and it has been linked with higher patient satisfaction, well-being, quality of life, and health-related knowledge. So this is really part of what's called shared decision-making, which I'll talk about more on the next slide here. I wanted to share 3 different models of provider-patient relationships and have you think about what that looks like in your life and your ideal life. So the first model is called the active-passive model. It is the more traditional model. It's much older. Essentially, it means that the provider supposedly knows everything, knows the right decisions, and will just act without any input from the patient, and they may or may not get consent. This is not a good model. This should never happen. This is terrible healthcare. The next 2 models are more acceptable. And the middle one is called the guidance cooperation model. So in this model, again, the provider has the knowledge and the power, and the provider chooses the best course, and they make recommendations. In this model, the patient is just kind of expected to follow the recommendations, but they at least have that choice at the end that they can choose to do the recommendations or not. The third model, which is much more supported recently, is called the mutual participation model, and this involves shared decision-making. In this model, there's no power dynamic. There's an equal partnership between the provider and the patient. The patient is the expert in their life, and particularly their goals, which I think we kind of lose sight of our goals in healthcare, but the goals are what should drive your decisions. The provider is the expert in knowledge and should be working with the patient to help achieve the goals. So what I'd like you to think about now is where in this continuum on the right half of the slide, please don't choose the active passive model because it's unethical, but how much decision-making power would you like to have in your provider-patient relationships? Because not everyone wants, too much say. They would like someone that hopefully knows a lot to give them good recommendations. But I'd like you to think about between the blue and the green here, where do you think that you would feel comfortable? And then think about your current providers that you see regularly. And are the providers that you see matching what you'd like, or are they maybe a little too pushy, or are they asking you too many questions about what you want? And you're like, I don't know, just tell me what you think. So you can think about that for a minute. And if you'd like to unmute and share, you're welcome to. If you'd like to put anything in the chat, you're welcome to do that as well. I'll give you a minute to ponder that. I see a too pushy, not listening.
Yes, I'm fairly new to this IC diagnosis. I've had it for about 2 to 3 months. I went to a urologist, and she gave me the outline that she wanted me to do. I'm on aloe vera, Tagamet, and I just got through doing some physical therapy, but the aloe vera seems to be helping the most. I've been on it for 2 months. I was just wondering if anyone else is on aloe vera or Tagamet. Those are the only 2 medications that she asked me to do, and she wanted me to try it for 3 months and then come back and see her. I just wanted some input on what other people are taking.
Are you talking about the aloe vera capsules or the
Yes,
liquid?
the capsules from
capsule.
Desert.
The Desert Harvest? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm up to-
I think they were helping, but I had trouble swallowing those large capsules. They're large and I have a swallowing problem, and they were just, you had to take so many a day. So I couldn't actually tell whether or not they were helping. I could not tell.
Yeah, I know they're a little hard to swallow, but I just take a big gulp of water and take one at a time. I'm up to 12 capsules now. I was taking 6 the first month, 9 the second month, and now I'm up to 12 this month.
I mean, that's
Oh.
great. If that's helping you, that's like
Well,
such
it's
a
not
great natural.
complete. It's not completely, but it has, my symptoms have subsided a little bit. But boy,
Right.
every day and another thing I was just wondering, at night I feel better. Does anyone else have that not problem? It's a good problem. But around 6 or 7 at night, my pain, I usually have back pain and abdomen pressure. And at night around 6 or 7, I tend to feel a lot better. Then I wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning and the pain is there. And I don't understand why that's happening, but I mean, I'm happy for it. At least I get some relief. But I was just wondering if anyone else has that condition.
Well, that's one of the interesting things about IC is that everyone's experiences of it are very unique and very different. So, and that's one of the reasons it's so important to be an advocate and speak up for yourself with providers, because they can't treat you all the same. You have to talk about your specific, what's going well, what's going not well, and go from there.
The problem is that I saw her 2 months ago, and then she said, I'll see you in 3 months. And to even talk to her on the phone is a problem. So it's like I'm going 3 months without any education on this. You know, I'm just doing what she's telling me to do. And no education on if I'm doing better or if I'm not doing better, what can I do to improve in 3 months? So it's like I'm going 3 months without any help at all.
That's a really good point you bring up. And that's kind of a standard practice for many specialists is, okay, we see you, then we wait 3 months, or a lot of times the first follow-up is 3 months. And then they say, okay, why don't we try 6 months, or why don't we try a year now? And I would, in that appointment, whenever appointment you see your provider, say, hey, if I have questions in the meantime, what is the best way to communicate with you? Do I need to send a message? Do I need to leave a voicemail? Because I want to know what the plan is if I need to get in touch before our scheduled appointment. It's
very difficult to get through. She'll tell me, well, just call and you know, but I get if I get an email, maybe the nurse calls me back, or, I want to talk to her, but she won't. Very hard to get in or to talk to her. So it's like, I'm in my 3rd month and I have lots of questions, but I can't get through to her.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, that's a problem across healthcare. And I think that one of the things I wanted to mention is that it's always good to get a second opinion, but you're probably going to have the same issue if you try a different office as well. And it's hard to predict. You might have the same issue. You might have someone that's quite responsive. So it is certainly a challenge.
Yeah, when you get a second opinion, then you got to go through your insurance to get the okay. Then you have to wait. Then you call to make the appointment after your insurance says it's okay to go see that particular person. And it takes 2 to 3 months to get an appointment with that person.
Yes.
I
What I
suffered
would
for.
say is that in the meantime, we're going to rely less on the clinician expertise part of the stool and more on you. So again, you're the expert of you, you're the expert of what you're experiencing. So you can start to really track things and try and make some decisions about, is this working? Is this not working? What information can I find that I'm not getting from my clinician? So, and then I can bring that information when I am able to get in.
Yeah, for many years, the ICA had a woman, I can't remember her name. She was wonderful. Like I could ask her questions. She wasn't a doctor, but I could ask her questions. And then I think she sort of retired. And then, on Facebook, there's a private group for ICA. And that was very helpful for me. Like if I would like, because everyone that's on there is going through has IC. And so you say, have any of you, like I had to get a iron infusion. And I remember, different people gave me different feedback, which I found very helpful. They warned me about this or that or this or that. I was just I was texting, someone was helping me try to figure out why I can't get back onto the Facebook group. And it has to do with something technical. And I don't know. I think I need someone young in the house that can help me with my Facebook account. I think it doesn't have but anyway, if you can get into that ICA Facebook group and just put it out there, the issue, like you'll get so many responses, people will give you'll hear about Desert Harvest. People will give you so many suggestions. You won't believe it.
Yeah, I had a couple of people, one of my neighbors, she happened to know someone that had it. And so I called her and, she says, look, do this or do that, try this, try Tylenol PM to sleep. But I don't have a problem with sleeping because the pain goes away at night.
That's a gift. That's a blessing.
I'm so happy that you brought all this up, and I'm hopeful that this talk will help you figure out some ways to get some more information, including that Facebook group to kind of crowdsource. In the interest of time, I do want to move on. I see that Xenia's got her hand up and has been waiting. So let's see what she would like to say, and then we'll continue on.
Hi, very nice to meet everyone. I was wondering, I'm kind of in a bind, so I would be interested to see how to evaluate an opinion when you get different one from every next physician. Because I'm a bit stuck. My previous urologist mentioned cyclosporin. He did not think that was a good way for me to go. And he also did not think that the urinary diversion neobladder was a good way for me to go. And now I have a new urologist who is really kind of pushing both. And the reason I have new one, that was the old one stopped taking the insurance. So I was actually comfortable with them. So then I went and tried to find a third one. There's a service that offers expert medical opinion. My husband luckily has that offer through his employer. So, I took advantage of that. And then I get a third opinion that was different from the other two. Basically, he's saying no on cyclosporin, but he thinks neobladder is a good way for me to go. Incidentally, if anybody has experience with neobladder, I would love to hear how that went. Also, an interesting point is for a long time for IC, surgical solutions were considered ineffective. So I was even surprised that was on the table at all. So somehow I feel like that attitude towards the surgical solution has changed, and I don't understand. Like I didn't see any new research or like why suddenly, because before and I've read a ton of stuff, it was like, okay, yeah, the neobladder, they can put it in and 3 months later you get, you know, the same thing is essentially happening to your new bladder as was happening to the old one. I want to mention that I do have Hunner's ulcers, because I understand that sort of they seem to distinguish these days, the ulcerative versus non-ulcerative, but I don't understand that kind of the shift in opinion. So if you have any input on that, or how that even happens without sort of any noticeable breakthrough, I should say. Thank you.
So yes, I think that we will be coming up to at the end how to make decisions, especially when you get conflicting opinions from people. In this space, we are not going to be talking about specific recommendations in terms of interventions for individuals, because we frankly don't have the time for that. But there are spaces like that Facebook group that you can kind of crowdsource people's past experiences. And I know from, I've read many intervention studies and clinical guidelines on interventions for people with IC, and in general, the surgical options are not recommended. So you were correct in reading that, because it is not really proven to be very helpful and it is permanent. So there are many things that I would recommend trying before trying that option. But yes, we will come up to the how do we make a decision. All right. So now that we've talked about different types of evidence, I wanted to share some resources with you about where you can look for some reliable evidence, and hopefully avoiding some misinformation. So I started with a list of some more consumer-friendly, reliable resources, because a lot of scientific studies are just really hard to read. I hate reading them and I have to read them. So some more consumer-friendly resources. You can start with your provider. They can either give you some information or maybe point you to some specific information they're aware of. Government sites like the CDC or Department of Health and Human Services, which is the HHS or NIH, those sites are reliable information and they are tailored to consumers. Medline Plus, again, it's very similar. They have some summaries. Various medical centers have information for patients, and the Cochrane Consumer Network. So this is a free membership community. It's open to patients, caregivers, family members, and others. And they have digests coming out each month with different information. I don't know a whole lot about that, but it came up on a list. So a good thing about these sites is that they are easy to read, but a lot of times that they kind of give a broad overview. So it's a little bit hard to get solid information from these types of sites. On the next page is a little bit less consumer friendly, but they do have more specific information. So Google Scholar is a good way to look up research articles. And I would recommend you can certainly read the whole article, but the articles all have a little summary at the top called the abstract. So you can at least get an idea of if it is what you are looking for. PubMed similarly is a place that you can look up research articles if you plop in some search terms with the condition or intervention you want to learn more about. The Cochrane Library. The Cochrane Library is full of the top tier evidence, which is called the systematic reviews. They do very rigorous reviews of all the information out there. I really don't recommend reading them because they're very, very long. However, all of them have a plain language summary right at the beginning, which is super helpful. So if you want to look up a Cochrane review and read that plain language summary, I would recommend that. Okay, so why is reliable information important? Because less reliable information can cause harm. So Laura mentioned this earlier, that poor information, it can be harmful. And if we're reading less reliable information, it can increase your worry. So if we're trying to look up things on Dr. Google and we're seeing, if you look up anything, you will find an article saying you might have brain cancer. So it can really steer you in the wrong direction. It can increase your tension with family members, lead you to make poor decisions, and lead you to delay care, which are all problems.
All
And I will
right.
pass it over to
Thank-
Laura.
Thank you, Renee. So now we're going to get into unpacking health claims. And Xenia, this may help you a little bit with the question that you had, because when we're talking about, in the context of this webinar, when we're talking about a health claim, I am talking about any claim that someone is making about a treatment strategy for IC. So the whole spectrum of examples here. So anything from, let's say you post something in that private Facebook group and someone responds and says, "Ooh, you should not eat or drink that because it's going to make your symptoms worse." Or maybe you're browsing online, or maybe you're still on Facebook and you know that algorithm feeds you all sorts of ads, and maybe an ad comes up for something like supplement powder and it says, "Hey, recommended for people living with this condition. If you drink this, your symptoms are going to go poof overnight," or something like that. Okay. But this also includes recommendations from healthcare providers. So if you have a healthcare provider that says, "Hey, I think you should go through this procedure or surgery or take a new medication because I think it's going to help reduce your symptoms," that is also a health claim. And all of these things warrant taking time to think them through, regardless of the source. And so what I want to give you here is what I think is a fairly straightforward way of unpacking any sort of health claim. And I would almost advocate for this to be like a mindfulness moment. I know mindfulness is kind of this buzzword now, but there is kind of a reason for that. And I see this as a mindfulness moment because we're bombarded all the time with information. And when you get a health claim, something that could impact a decision that you make about your care, it is worth sitting with it for a minute. And the who, what, when, where, and why questions are a great way to sit with it and unpack it. So one of the first things you really want to ask is, okay, who is making this claim? So if it's a person, do you know this person? Do you have a trusted relationship with this person? Do you know if that person cares about you as an individual? If it's something online, do you know who runs or created the site or the app that you're on? So taking a moment to think about, okay, who is making this claim? What exactly is the claim? What is being offered or promised? And does the claim seem to be too good to be true? And in a second, I'm going to talk about red flags. But depending on that type of claim, you might think, "Oh, wow, that sounds amazing." And that's great, but that also should be something that makes you think a little bit about it. When was the information written or created? Is it up to date? And even in the scientific literature, you might find something like, I'm having a hard time. I'm feeling a little old because, I teach and I'm going through the articles that I provide my students. I'm like, "Oh, here's a great article from 2009. Oh, wait a minute. That is 14 years old." And so even in the scientific literature, you have to pay attention to the timeliness of the information. Where does this information come from? Which is somewhat similar to the who, but the question really here is, do we know if this is based on scientific research? Do we know if the information is coming from a source that is peer-reviewed or not peer-reviewed? And what I mean there is generally a journal article, something that's published that you're finding oftentimes like on Google Scholar or PubMed. Other people who are experts in the field have reviewed that work to ensure that it is rigorous enough to be put out into the world. And so peer-reviewed research or information is going to be a little bit more reputable than something that's not peer-reviewed. And the why is a big one too. Why is this claim being made? Is it coming from someone who might be selling something? And it's not that like one answer to any one of these questions should dictate how you feel about a claim, but it really is about putting all of these answers together to give you a big picture. And so, if I'm on Facebook and that feed algorithm gives me an ad for for a product that, like I mentioned before, that poof, if you put this in your water, all of your urethral burning is going to go away overnight. That versus having a conversation with maybe my primary care provider who I've had a relationship with for a couple of decades, and I know that person is fairly up to date in the literature. And when they make a recommendation to me, they say, "Actually, there was a recent study that came out that showed that an X percentage of people had a significant reduction in symptoms." Like, I'm going to look at those two claims. When I unpack those, I'm going to look at them very differently, and that's going to affect the decision making that I have. I mentioned red flags, and I think it's worth pointing a few of these out. And I don't think that any of these are going to be new to you, but these are things that should, from my perspective, give you kind of immediate pause. And so one is just like the spam emails, or all caps, lots of exclamations. If somebody is yelling at you, and I mean like something in writing online, that should be a little bit of a red flag. I really do urge caution when people use words like cure or proven. And sometimes, and I've heard clinicians use these words, that this is proven too. There are very, very few things that are proven to do things. That's a big word. And so I think being cautious of hard to believe claims, anything that seems too good to be true should give you pause. And similarly, anything that, you know, is meant to probably evoke strong emotion in you, or if you're not able to identify a source, if you see something online and you just have no idea where it's coming from, all of those things should really be red flags when you're thinking about making a decision. I do want to take a moment to comment about dietary supplements, because this is an area where health claims get a little bit muddy. And I don't want you at all to take this as I am picking on dietary supplements. I honestly am not. But there are some things that folks should be aware of before you make a decision to use a dietary supplement. And I think one of the first things that's really important to know is that the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, they do not approve dietary supplements for safety or effectiveness. And a lot of times they actually will not know that a product is out there until after it is on the market and people are already taking it. So the FDA does not do work to analyze the contents of dietary supplements, and you will know if something is a dietary supplement because they're required to have it on the label. So I think that's important to know. Sometimes on a website for a supplement, you will see something about the FDA. And usually what that means is that because their facilities are required to register with the FDA, so there are certain regulations around safety practices within the facility that they have to follow. So a facility can be registered with the FDA, but that does not mean, again, that they have done anything to review or analyze the contents of the product or can comment on the safety or effectiveness of it. Now, all ingredients do need to be on the label, and that's a really good thing that I'll talk about here in a second. And when it comes to claims, so interestingly, a company can put a claim on a product if they feel like it is substantiated. But the FDA is not going to review or approve that claim. So it really comes down to the company making a determination about whether they feel like a claim is substantiated. And that is why you see on a lot of these supplements the statement that you see there in bold, that this product not been evaluated by the FDA, not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. So with supplements, they often don't have more than anecdotal evidence. So kind of that lower part tier of that triangle or pyramid that Renee pointed out. That doesn't mean that they're not helpful, and it does not mean that they are harmful. So I want to be very clear about that. But I do think that everyone really needs to take the time to evaluate potential risks. One of the things that I always recommend, because all of those ingredients are on the label, take that to your pharmacist. We sometimes forget about pharmacists. They are such an important part of our healthcare team, and they would be happy to take a look at a product, compare it to things that you're taking, including supplements. You want to be honest, tell them everything, and they can help you be a part of that decision-making process around, is this something that might be problematic for you based on things that you're already taking? So that's my 2 cents on dietary supplements. The other thing that I do want to say here too, just to be clear, is just because something is natural does not mean that it's healthy. And especially the dose is important too, okay? But equally important, we need to make a comment about FDA-approved medications too, because just because a medication has been reviewed for safety and effectiveness doesn't necessarily mean that it's a good option for you. And there was a number of reasons for this. So a lot of times, when a drug goes through the initial testing phases, it may be shown to be safe and effective in the population in which it's been studied. But when it gets out more broadly, so if it gets approved and a lot of people start taking it and more people continue to do research, and the more data that we get, sometimes we will actually find out that there could be some adverse effects that we didn't find in initial research. Or we can sometimes find that it's actually not more effective than a placebo or a sugar pill. And so that's why that timeliness of information is really important. The most current research is going to give you the most up-to-date data that we have on FDA-approved medications. We also have to make decisions about side effects because sometimes it's not going to be worth it for you, even if it is effective, and it may not work for you. People react differently to medications. So I think those are all things to kind of keep in mind. So I want to do like I'm going to do a very brief exercise here, and I'm not picking on Nature's Way. I need to be clear about that too. This was just the first example I happened to find. And okay, so can everybody see the website here for zinc lozenges? Okay, I see Renee nodding her head. Good. Okay, so this is just an example. So what I would say is let's treat this as a health claim. Okay, so let's say I've been sick with the cold for 3 days. And I'm not, thankfully, but let's say I have been. And I've been looking up like, oh man, what can I do to treat my symptoms? And I see something about, oh, maybe zinc would be helpful. And this ad pops up. And this is what I see. Okay. So I want you to I'm going to scroll through this. And again, kind of thinking with the who, what, when, where, and why in mind, or even just things that you notice. I want you to just what do you notice about this? Okay. So we've got the label here on the front. It's dairy-free and vegan. Okay. You can actually see, right? So you can see the supplement facts. We've got some recommendations here. All those ingredients, right? Because this is a dietary supplement. So we've got all of the ingredients on here. Also tells you what's not in there. And just a little comment here about the company, okay? And if you continue to scroll down, there's some additional details. So you can get more information about ingredients. Someone even left a review, I think. So you can see some product details here around, okay, so supports immune function. There's a little asterisk, okay? And here we keep going. For healthy immune function, another little asterisk. And if we keep going, so here we see the statement, it's not been evaluated by the FDA. I'm going to keep going though, because at the bottom here, we have some additional statements, so that asterisk from before. So again, we have the statement again about this not being evaluated by the FDA. We also have another statement here about there are no valid studies using current scientific methods that confirm this product's efficacy. These indications are based solely on traditional homeopathic principles. And another comment here about these are only for traditional homeopathic use. And again, they're stating this has not been evaluated by the FDA. So if you were in my situation, having a cold for 3 days, and this ad had popped up and you took a look at this, how might you unpack this? What are some of the things that you're noticing? And you can put it in the chat or feel free to unmute too.
First thing I notice are sweeteners.
Okay.
I'm highly allergic to sweetener.
Got
One
it.
sweetener will give me a migraine for 30 days.
Got it. Okay.
So
So you
I see mannitol, which is a sweetener, and they had there's other things as well. But if you go into the inactive ingredients, there you go. That's where sorbitol, also a sweetener. The natural flavor, right? Sodium bicarbonate, that's fine. That's baking soda. French vanilla flavor. What?
Yeah, I noticed that too.
They're just now coming out and saying stevia isn't even that safe because it's safe if you chew the leaf, but they take it to the laboratory, bastardize it, add all kinds of other talc and crystalline magnesium stearates and all kinds of things. So basically, ew.
So you're really zeroing in on those ingredients. And I think it's great that you're looking at those inactive ingredients too, because sometimes those get overlooked, but those are still things that are in the product. So I think those are great observations. What else do people note about this?
If I may,
Sure.
I did notice the vitamin C.
Okay.
And I know from a friendly pharmacist that vitamin C does dry mucus So actually, that's why it's such a wide recommendation. Usually they talk about the immune system and this and that, but in reality, it's what vitamin C does is dry out mucus. Yeah, so I mean, again, the question becomes, should it be taken in this particular product or separately, or just, as a form from the food, but there's that.
Right. Yeah. So we've got folks who are excellent observers of ingredients. And, for me, when I look at this, one of the things I'm a bit concerned about that I would be like, there's no studies using current scientific methods. That's kind of interesting. And so one of the things that I would probably do, and I know we're short in time, so I'm going to jump to this next link. I would Google this. I would start with a Google, and I would look for what I think are reputable sites. And this is a product of me Googling zinc and the common cold. And we're short on time, otherwise I'd click through some of these. But what I noticed from some of these more reputable, like government websites or .orgs or .edus, is that the evidence is actually kind of mixed for zinc. And in fact, there's some things noted around that, there are certain doses that can actually be harmful to you. Some people have noticed some more significant side effects, and the evidence that's fairly limited that shows any potential for effectiveness is really only at a particular dosage and if you start taking it right away. So it's just an example briefly of kind of, if you see a claim, take some time to unpack it and then go to some of those more trusted resources to see what you can find. And certainly, of course, always consider your pharmacist and other members of your healthcare team as well. So I know we're short on time. So Renee, I'm going to turn things back to you for our last section here on decision making.
All right, so this is getting to Xenia's question. Well, how do we make decisions? And we'll talk about different factors to help you decide. Unfortunately, with IC, there's not this strong evidence for any specific intervention, because if there were, we wouldn't have to make this decision. We would just know how to treat it and we'd be good. So in lieu of not having strong evidence to help us decide, at least from a clinical standpoint, we're going to talk about how you can go ahead and make decisions for you. So we're going to consider the 3 legs of the stool again. The research evidence, as I said, there's not a lot out there for many of the different options for IC. If you do find some studies, you're trying to consider who did it. Is it coming from an individual or a private entity? How much do we trust it? And how reliable is it within that pyramid? If you're getting a claim from your clinician, what is their expertise? Are they telling you current evidence? Are they listening to you? I think that's a really big one. And then patient preference. Really think about what matters the most to you. It's easy to say, I just want all my symptoms gone. I want to be the way I was before. But that's unlikely to happen, at least in one go. So think about right now, what is most important to you to address? What outcomes are important to you? And what are you most afraid of? And what do you most want to avoid? Once we think about that, our information that we have in front of us, now we're trying to weigh the pros and cons of each option. Consider which cons are acceptable to you and which are not, because every option has some pros and every option has some cons. Then consider which pros are most important to you. Then I think this is a big one. Consider what you are realistically willing to commit to. So it's easy to say, like, what is the best option? It could be something drastic, but is that a good option for you? Are you actually going to do it, or is it not a good option for you? If someone's saying, take this medication every hour, that you might not be able to do that. And that's okay. Another piece of advice is to start with small steps first. I would also recommend talking through your options with someone you trust and who knows you well. This can be family, this can be friends, this can be providers. And think about whatever option you're considering. Is there going to need to be some support from your significant other, for example, to implement it, or is it something that you can implement on your own? If you're still looking for some more structured guidance, there is an Ottawa decision-making guide. I've put the link here as well as on our reference page, but it really walks you through kind of what I was describing before. what are you trying to decide? Where are you in the decision-making process? What are your different options? And going through it systematically might help you decide. There isn't always a good decision or a best decision. So it's really up to you to think about your goals. As I mentioned earlier, your goal should be the driving force behind it. All right. So I have I have a little case, but I'm thinking maybe we should skip it. Yeah, let's skip it, Laura.
Yeah. It's similar enough maybe to what we've done, so that's okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. But this slide here is still important. These are still good bullets for making a decision.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I was looking at the chat. So how to decide. So first step is to consider the reliability of the information in front of you. This is really just summarizing the previous slides, so we can move on.
Okay. Okay. So as mentioned, we've got a slide with our references. So all of the resources that we use to prepare the presentation are available to you, and you'll get a copy of this. So we definitely encourage you to peruse these as you are interested. There's a lot of good information here. The one thing I also want to mention just briefly, if you found the content of this webinar interesting or relevant, I wanted to give you a heads up about a program that Renee and I have built and are offering in September. It actually starts in September 18th and runs for 6 weeks. And it's called the Learning to Thrive program. And it's all about how to manage conditions like IC, but with a very specific focus on chronic pain. We address some of this content in the workshop, but we do a lot more, like focusing on how pain is produced and maintained in the body, and especially important, looking at ways that we can, as individuals, manage our own pain. As I said, it's 6 weeks. It is mostly asynchronous, which it means that most weeks or each week you're going to be reviewing materials on your own time. And then each Saturday, so 6 Saturdays, we get together for a virtual session to talk about the things that you reviewed that week. And everything can be done from home. It's completely virtual. And so be on the lookout for more information from this from the ICA. That will be coming out via their newsletter and probably posted on social media as well. So if you're interested in learning more about this type of information, especially around managing pain, this might be an option for you.
And
so,
Zinnia, I see your hand is up and you wrote something in the chat, which I want to hear more about this expert opinion thing. So can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, I mentioned that briefly. That's a service that my husband's employer offers. It's a company called Included or Integrated Health. I wrote it in the chat. And I thought that was actually fairly helpful because they collect all of your medical data, and then the physician actually talks to you, and then they select a specialist that looks at your case and provides their opinion. I mean, in my case, some questions, it didn't provide a clear answer, but it did help rule out something. So I'm sure there's more than one company that does this. So it is called expert medical opinion. And in my case, I was getting a third opinion. But yeah, so I just wanted to mention that I think people might find it helpful, and it's all in writing, and they kind of summarize your medical history for you. I mean, I've actually learned a few things that doctors haven't told me about that I wasn't clear about. For example, whether I have Hunner's ulcers or not. I mean, they were mentioning ulcers, and I wasn't sure if that's so I found it helpful. So I wanted to share the piece of information. I think people might, that's a tool that they might consider.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I know we took us right up to 6 o'clock, and I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. I do hope that, I know this was a lot of information, so you'll get the slides. I would encourage you to come back to them, take a look at those references, and really, hopefully you pulled something tangible. But again, I would encourage that mindfulness moment. When a claim is made or you're about to make a decision, take some time to unpack that and think about that three-legged stool, making sure that you're involving each of those in an equal fashion, because I do think that's going to lead to more informed decisions for you. Lee, I'm going to turn things over to you for some final words.
Great. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. Santurri and Dr. Hetzler. Today's session was so informative. I hope you all can agree. If you all found this event to be of value, please consider joining us for future webinars and share these opportunities with your community. A friendly reminder to please complete the post-webinar survey that we're posting in the chat. And also, we wanted to invite you to join us for our IC Awareness Month activities. These are taking place in September, and there are multiple ways in which you can become involved. We have it's free to register, and it's our biggest educational awareness and fundraising event of the year. So watch your email for more information. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Bye-bye.